Hi everyone, welcome to Closer's Coffee. I'm your host, Carlos Figuerella, and on today's episode, we're talking with Brooks Powell, CEO of Cheers. Cheers is a leader in the alcohol-related health industry, creating products that reduce alcohol's negative effects, supporting your liver, and is helping millions of people feel better the next day. I gained valuable insights speaking with Brooks. In this episode, we discuss his time at Princeton, the challenges faced while launching his brand, and what it's like battling Mark Cuban on Shark Tank. Again, I really enjoyed my time with Brooks, and I hope you enjoy as well. Stay tuned for more. Brooks, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Excited to have you on the show and really look forward to learning more about Cheers. And, you know, this journey started in Princeton. Tell us, how did Cheers manifest?
Yeah, so basically I was a sophomore at Princeton. Eventually I sort of wanted to become a pastor. So I wasn't sort of actually majoring in anything scientific, but I was doing an independent class project, basically cataloging how neuroscience opinions have changed in relation to alcohol over the decades. For example, you know, as early as sort of the 1960s, it was actually okay for pregnant women to drink, right?
Wow.
And these things kind of flip-flopped based on like the prohibitionist movements that were flip-flopping every sort of 80 years or so, right? So we're sort of tracking the thread of sort of doctor opinions on this.
Okay.
And I was in the right place at the right time to come across an article that had just been published in the Journal of Neuroscience. And the article title was called Dihydroamycin as a Novel Anti-Intoxication Medication.
It's a big word.
It's a big word, dihydroamycin, but basically what these researchers did is they took the parent plant, boiled it down to its sort of chemical extract, dihydroamycin, and then what they did is they injected it into rats at large doses. So they found they could instantly sober up rats. You might be wondering how you sort of prove that. Well, what you do is you get a rat, you put it in this cradle, and a sober rat can get out of this cradle in about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay.
Well, the drunk rats, they basically would get stuck in this cradle for about 45 to 50 minutes, right? Until they sort of sober up enough to be able to flip out of this cradle. The second thing that they found is that if they left a rat in a room with food, water, and alcohol, by the second week, they were already doubling their alcohol consumption. And by the third and fourth week, they actually quadrupled their sort of daily alcohol consumption compared to the first week. So they basically became full-blown alcoholic within 4 weeks, right?
Okay.
Well, the control group had, the test group had dihydroamycin in the water cup. And basically what's really interesting is these rats never increased their alcohol consumption pattern, nor did they stop drinking. So they were getting the pleasure of drinking without a lot of the sort of physiological dependence to it. And then finally, rats given DHM showed no signs of hangovers, which they proved in 3 ways, right? Because you can't really ask a rat how hungover.
There's no surveys here.
So what you do is, typically a healthy rat likes to sit like this, sort of paws, right, like this. Well, a hungover rat actually puts its like a sick, or, you know, if it's not feeling well, its paws basically do this and its head droops to a certain level.
Wow.
So what they did is they would take a rat in its normal sort of state, measure the distance between its paws, and then see how spread apart its paws were after sort of a dose of alcohol, and then once the resulting hangover started. So that was sort of a whole sort of science class all in itself. But basically what I did is I read this and said, oh my gosh, this is a chemical extract, meaning it can get sold as a dietary supplement. What if we commercialized its immediate beneficial purpose, right, as a hangover cure, right, and sell it, and then theoretically, based on the animal studies, it could be effective for humans in terms of putting them at less risk for alcohol addiction. So within about 4 weeks of reading that study, I had sort of quit on the pastor dream, instantly made sort of a total career change, you know, changed all my classes out at Princeton, and started working with a number of Princeton professors to try to get this project off the ground.
Wow. So you saw a study and you immediately thought about how to commercialize it and go to market with something that was meant as just a scientific paper. How does that manifest in your ideas? Like, you're talking about being a pastor,
Yep.
right? And now you all of a sudden get this business idea off of a class.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's two types of entrepreneurs in the world. And I'm not the only one that says this, right? So I'm not sort of that smart or that experienced, but what I've heard said, right, is that there's some people that know they want to be entrepreneurs. Deep down, they know, I want to like build something, right? And what they do is they go through life looking for that thing to build, right? And then there's the other types of entrepreneurs. So they're basically an entrepreneur in search of an idea, right?
Okay.
Then there's the other types of entrepreneurs that aren't ever planning to become an entrepreneur, but come across something that they get so passionate about, they have no choice but to bring it into the world themselves, right? So the idea creates the entrepreneur, right? Some entrepreneurs create ideas and other ideas create entrepreneurs, and I'm definitely of the latter camp, right? I came across this idea that was so compelling that I said, I have to do this. And the reason I actually felt like I had to be the one that did this is, theoretically speaking, bringing dihydromycin into the market, no matter how you brand it, would be a good thing, right? Alcohol, anytime you consume alcohol, you should take dihydromycin, right? Based on sort of the animal studies and actually what the human studies are starting to show as well. But what I felt is that the way in which you brought it to market matters, right? Because if you come out and you say, oh, this is a hangover cure and it's going to allow you to binge drink, right? Then all of a sudden people are binge drinking more and then taking this hangover cure product, and that it's not really sort of getting to the root cause of the problem. And so my whole thought was, why don't we sort of flip this on its head and make dihydromycin all about sort of responsible drinking, making it like sunscreen for alcohol, right? It's the thing that if you get home after a happy hour, right, and you're going to bed and your wife's like, did you take your Cheers pills? And you're like, no, right? And you go take it because you don't want to feel like garbage the next day, and your wife doesn't want you to feel like garbage the next day, and it's the responsible thing to do. So for me, it's sort of a double bottom line. Let's get as much dihydromycin onto the market as possible, and let's brand it in such a way that promotes fun, responsible, and health-conscious alcohol consumption.
And so you talk about your time at Princeton and creating and conceptualizing this vision based off of this study. How did you go to market?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to kind of back it up one step, so I got really excited about this really quick, right? So within like a few days of reading the study, you couldn't buy dihydromycin in the United States. So I had figured out how to get a kilo shipped from China into the United States, which, for the record, if you buy a kilo of something, it comes in like a powder brick.
Okay.
And it's really hard to get it through customs because
Sure.
it just looks like it's like a pound of cocaine or something, right?
Now Brooks Powell is on some list.
Right. Probably. But anyways, I got so excited about it, talked with my neuroscience professor at the time, and I knew I was on to something when he got so excited about it that he scrapped a planned class lecture and lectured on this instead.
Yeah.
And instantly asked, I think this is really cool. How can I be a part of it, right? So for us, most of the main initial steps was figuring out how to manufacture it and figuring out how this would sort of certify under the FDA.
Okay.
So that we could legally sell it. And so really sort of figuring out the supply chain, figuring out how to legally sell it, and then me sort of building my network over the next 2 years at Princeton, because I discovered it when I was a sophomore, formally sort of founded an LLC between my sophomore and my junior year of Princeton, really spent about 2 years laying the foundation. By the end of my senior year, we had sort of figured out the supply chain piece, right? Figured out how to manufacture it here in the United States with a manufacturer that specializes in both nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals. Started doing some initial branding. Originally, the brand was called Thrive Plus. Now it's called Cheers. We can chat about that. But basically, it all became very real when, prior to me graduating from Princeton, I started pitching a lot of angel investors, right, with this idea of, hey, we have this thing. We figured out how to produce the product. People like the product, We've done patents on it, et cetera. Now it's time for us to really bring it to market. Will you give us a few $100,000? And so that's when it actually became real, is when those sort of wire transfers hit the bank.
Yeah, being Thrive Plus.
Yep.
And now your Cheers. Talk about a little bit of your early challenges and adversity faced. And I'm assuming that's definitely one of them. Switching your brand seems challenging.
Yeah, for us, when we switched the brand, that was actually after we had been on Shark Tank.
Okay.
We had built, a decently sized company sort of at the time. We had already kind of gotten over about 5 million in annual sales, and really had a lot of volume going. And it wasn't, so what we did is we went out. So we did our angel round, we grew the business, we're on Shark Tank, really sort of figured out, hey, this is a scalable thing for us. We then went out and raised a $2.1 million seed round from sort of institutional venture capital investors. And with that, and this is sort of what we pitched the investors, was that, hey, with your capital, we want to do a bunch of R&D to figure out how to increase the bioavailability of DHM and make a product that no one else can compete with, right? Have true sort of intellectual property around dihydroxyrestin. And two, we want to build a brand that has the power of becoming a household name. And so originally, when we named the thing Thrive Plus, right? There was a sophomore in college that picked the name, i.e. me. And there wasn't a lot of thought that went into it. Right. And so this was the first time where he said, hey, we have the business, we have the capital to be able to pull off a rebrand. It's kind of now or never if we want to, build a sort of an iconic brand that has, the legs to sort of stand the test of time. And so that was sort of about, call it 3 to 6 months of soul searching. Okay. Trying to figure out what do we want this brand to, we had a rough sense of what we wanted it to be about, but trying to figure out the name and how all the pieces fit together. And then it was about 6 months of, look, when you're doing $5 million a year, that's a lot of inventory that's going in and out. We have a bunch of different packages. We were selling both on Amazon and our website. So there's all these logistics going. So then to make a change to the bottle, then changes the box, which then changes the shipping weight. And there's it's like a house of cards,
yes.
Right? And so figuring out how to push chains through an already optimized business is really, really hard. And thankfully, we actually did it without without burning any inventory. Most companies, when they go through a rebrand, it's multi-million-dollar wastes, right? Because you have to get rid of old inventory, all the T-shirts you have don't work anymore, the sign on the building, you have to change that, and so forth.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people think about, in terms of the visuals, the marketing and those aspects, but no one thinks about supply chain and essentially all of the inventory that's on hand, what you're developing and planning. So it's a big moving target.
Right.
And in total, how long would you say that it took you to make that full transition over from Thrive Plus to Cheers?
Yeah, once we picked the name Cheers, we did a change in name only. So we just took all the old branding and just slapped Cheers on it. And then we made the announcement, hey, you're about to start seeing some changes, right? And we've sort of had to map out in different stages what these changes would look like. But to get product manufactured, you're looking at sort of 12-week lead times minimum, right?
Definitely.
And not all your products are getting reordered sort of or selling through at sort of the perfect rate. You're always sort of trying to optimize that, but there's economies of scale, so sometimes it's worth bumping up ordering of one product a little bit higher. And
sure.
So all these things are running out at different rates. We announced the rebrand in January, did the sort of switch in name only, and we had basically already had the finished brand done digitally. But you then had to wait for all this inventory to sell through. And so we didn't actually sell our last bottle of old branded Cheers, or Thrive Plus, until mid-July.
Wow.
So it was a good sort of 6 or 7 months. And when you look back at it, there's not a possible way that it could have been done any faster. Sorry, there is a way you could do it faster. It would just involve taking about $75,000 worth of inventory and just dumping it into the sea. Well, not, but you get the point, right?
Yeah. And so tell me about the company vision and its goals.
Yeah, I think, for us, we sort of went through this a lot of branding exercises to sort of figure this piece out. For us, the reason brand is so important is because, we're dealing with an issue that's stigmatized.
Sure.
Right? Hangovers, specifically for Americans, for Koreans, Japanese, a lot of these places don't sort of see hangovers as stigmatized. So it's not really an issue. And so like in Korea, they do, I forget how much in alcohol they sell each year, but they sell about $200 million worth of alcohol-related health, so liver supplements, to hangover products per year.
Got it.
Right? If you were to take that same percentage or that same ratio of hangover cure to sales to total alcohol spend in the country and applied it to the United States, it'd be over $3 billion.
Wow.
Right? So that is the level of sort of stigmatic difference. I don't even know if that's a word, but that's the level of difference, right? Where there's no stigma there and there is in the United States. And so this hasn't caught on as a category yet.
Yeah. And you mentioned that 56% of Americans consume alcohol monthly?
Yeah, before we talked about this, I mean, what we like to say is that the majority of Americans consume alcohol frequently, right?
Yeah.
Defined as at least once a month. So this is sort of a brand and a product that has the potential of touching the lives of over half of Americans, which I find really exciting. So we knew there was sort of this stigma piece here, right? So then we sort of thought, how do we build a brand that people are actually proud of using and not embarrassed of using? And so really the sort of key question that we always asked ourselves was, when you're in a grocery store, I know everyone does like Uber Eats and all this stuff now, but that's our age. But
yeah.
When you go to a grocery store and you're in line, you have a full sort of basket, right? And then someone that comes up behind you, and maybe it's a friend of your mom's or something, right? And then all of a sudden you start looking in your basket going like, oh my gosh, I have like 2 cases of beer in here, like a bottle of liquor and like a box of condoms. And then, I have some frozen meals. Like, what is this lady going to think of me?
Yep.
But like, I'm married. What do I care? Like, if this lady sees that I have a box of condoms,
sure.
Right? Like, it shouldn't be embarrassing. And yet, in a sense, it sort of is, because there's sort of a stigma around sex, right? Even for married couples or something to talk about it. So, for us, we sort of called it how do you pass sort of the grocery test,
yes.
Right? How do you sort of make a product where if someone that you knew that is like your pastor or your priest or whatever, right? Or a friend of your parents or so forth, they look into your basket, that you would actually be proud that this product is sitting in there, right? And so that was kind of like how we thought about it. And the one way that we decided to do it is alcohol consumption is sort of a natural human thing. Hangovers are a natural thing that occur even with moderate amounts of alcohol consumption. Therefore, why should this sort of be a hidden brand, right? Our thoughts was, no, you shouldn't have to be embarrassed about it. And so sort of our mission statement, right, is to promote fun, responsible, health-conscious alcohol consumption, both through our brand and through our products.
And so you've had a unique journey securing investment. Talk about that experience.
Yeah, it was annoying. I'd say that's the first part. When we went out to raise investments for our seed round, on paper, our business looked incredible. It had grown, 10x plus from the year before. It wasn't burning money. It was continuing to grow. Margins are good. They're not as good as like most dietary supplements where they see like stupid margins. Unfortunately, dihydroamycin hundreds of dollars a kilo, whereas vitamin C is like $5 a kilo, just to put this in perspective in terms of cost.
Wow.
But it was a good, fundamentally sound business that was growing like wildfire, right? So if you looked at it on paper, any investor in the world would want to buy into it, right? However, what would end up happening is we would talk to the investor, Usually it's sort of a lower member of the team, right? Such as an associate. The associate collects all the data, and then they bring that to a partner or someone higher in the firm. And sometimes you get the partner meetings right off the bat. It all depends on who intros you. And so we'd always have these like really positive first and second calls. And then basically you get this email that says, hey, we're really sorry, but, we actually just found out that our firm can't invest in the category because of LP restrictions. Or, one of our partners feels that this category being alcohol-related health supplements or drugs, isn't a good fit for them. And so ultimately, we had some friends that, run venture capital groups and so forth, and they basically explained to us, yeah, this can all come down to basically reputational risk.
Wow.
So even though you have a fundamentally sound business that's better than most of the businesses that they're looking at day to day, what's happening as a partner there is deciding, it's a great business, but our job as investors, what we hope to do is raise a new fund life. So every 5 years, venture capital investors go raise another fund life from universities, family offices, state pension funds, churches, et cetera. And when they go raise those funds, what those institutions that are investing into their institution are doing is looking into their portfolio.
Gotcha.
And so basically these partners are looking at the company going, I don't know if I want the company in my portfolio purely because it's alcohol related.
Just optics.
Just optics. That's all it was. And so that's the most frustrating thing, where you can have a slam dunk business and also a very ethical business and yet have people not invested in you because of this reputational risk or optics.
Wow. And so you initially started with a seed round.
Yep.
And how much was that?
So, we did an angel round.
Angel round.
So
okay.
First it was sort of a friends and family round. Then we did a $200,000 angel round from a single angel investor. And then we did a $2.1 million seed round from these institutional investors.
Wow. And throughout that process, that seems like an emotional roller coaster. How was that process, and what were some things you learned from it?
Yeah, I think as sort of an entrepreneur, now that I've gone through fundraising once, I think the first time you go through fundraising, you have a great call with somebody, and then you have a second great call with them, and then you get one of these emails that's so depressing or something, right? And as a founder, you're like, this is the end of the world, right?
Sure.
But then you end up looking like, now, so that we'll be going out for a Series A, I was just sort of building out our sort of investor database, and, we'll start with 5 investors that were interested and then go to the next 5 and so forth, right? And it ends up sort of being a surface area or a numbers game, right, at the end of the day, right? And obviously you want to go with the investors that you have the best fit with. But you look at it and go, there's like 1,500 venture capital firms in the United States alone, right? Controlling something like $100+ billion. It's actually probably more than that. I haven't looked at it in a little while.
Wow.
But you realize there's about 4,000 people that I could talk to. Now, some are investing in blockchain and would never invest in your company and so forth. But I think my point of view, right, is that investors, you have to impress them. You have to treat them right. If these people end up backing your business, they're going to become really great business partners that you need to have a really good relationship with. But they make mistakes all the time, right? They build portfolios where they're trying to have a few companies that go to 100 million plus, or if it's a really big fund, they can only go to $300 or $400 million, right? And then they have a lot of companies that go to 0, which means that they're kind of like baseball players. They strike out, or they don't get a hit far more often than they do get a hit, right?
Absolutely.
And if you actually look at the track record of entrepreneurs, generally speaking, it's an entrepreneur, if they do start 3 or 4 businesses, one of those businesses ends up doing really, really well. So entrepreneurs have a better track record than sort of investors. And so when you kind of look at it, you realize, hey, these are imperfect people making decisions on less than complete data.
Yeah.
And so you learn that you shouldn't really take it personal, because it's not like these people are, demigods running around or super geniuses or anything. They're humans as well.
What were some of the things that, really brought you and the company, in the lights of partners that they really wanted to get behind?
Right. I think, for us, it's all sort of relationships. And I don't mean like relationships in the sense that you're Donald Trump's cousin, right? And Donald Trump says, hey, you need to invest in my cousin.
Sure.
Right. I come from a middle-class family, so unfortunately my family sort of didn't have that network to do any of this. All of this was sort of me building my network through the years. But for us, we hadn't actually built the Cheers brand yet. We just sort of had Thrive Plus, which was sort of a very cursory exercise at branding, right? Mm-hmm. Wasn't very deep. The values weren't there. The mission and vision wasn't really spelt out. And a lot of this kind of came down to having multi-hour conversations with the proper investors, saying, here's what we think our vision is. Obviously, this is subject to change, but here's what it will never be, and here's what we think it will probably be, right? And a lot of this was basically getting investors comfortable with, no, Brooks is a very smart, very ethical guy, and he's painted a clear picture of the future, even though they don't know exactly how the brand is going to land, in sort of a box. So now we have that box there, but what we were pitching sort of investors is like, look, we'll figure that piece out, and we promise we won't embarrass you. And so we finally got some, obviously I'm biased here, but we finally got some really smart investors to take us up on that offer, and hopefully we get to reward them generously.
So you've worked with Princeton, a traditionally conservative institution.
Yep.
How was overcoming some of those challenges?
Yeah, so if you think investors are bad, capital P, Princeton, like as the whole organization, is extremely reputation risk adverse.
Okay.
Right? Just very sort of, they would much rather bet on things that are safer than things that could make the university look bad. So when they're sort of looking into, so basically working with Princeton, there was two reasons we really wanted to work with Princeton. The first is that Princeton has all these sort of entrepreneurial programs, such as like their eLab Summer Accelerator program, where they basically give you 20 grand, free housing, mentors, and just basically like a pretty kick-ass accelerator for 10 weeks, right? So this is a huge amount of value,
awesome.
Right, for you and your whole team. But you got to, convince people like, hey, we're not going to embarrass you, right? So when they're looking at a lot of different companies, like a robot that can try to cook your meals, which would probably cost so much that it's not commercially viable, versus something that at immediate glance, where the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, this is just a hangover cure,
yep, that
could support binge drinking, right? All of a sudden they're looking at that going like, the robot chef is starting to look a bit safer. And so the way we sort of managed, have you ever eaten an elephant?
I have not.
Okay, do you know how to?
I do not.
So it's one bite at a time. I've never eaten one either, but it's a good metaphor. And so what we basically did is we go, okay, here's this whole Princeton organization. Here's the stakeholders that actually matter. Here's the decision makers that I would actually control our fate within the university, right? And why don't we make relationships with and not use them, but make bona fide, genuine relationships with each person, and explain what our company is, what it does, and what we're going to become, right? And so, sure, if someone's like, oh, well, give me your pitch in 90 seconds, we can do it, and it's not great. But if you give me just a 25-minute lunch, you're going to come out of that lunch going like, yeah, sorry, Robo Chef, we're bringing this company in because they're going somewhere. And so for us, it was a lot of, you got to sit down with people and sort of explain the vision and where it's going. And you find people that are sort of willing to go to bat for you.
So you build relationships at the university, delivering authenticity, trust, becoming, showing your genuine intent. How long did it take you before you realized you were actually building momentum and gaining advocates within the institution?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little hard, right? Because you go, is it time or touch points, right? And so I think the way to think of it is, it took us about a year before, people realize, oh my gosh, like these people are legit, they're smart, they're ethical, and this business is going to do well. And so far we've done better, to my knowledge, than any other sort of cohort that's come through Princeton.
Wow.
Now there's other Princeton alum that are obviously far more successful than we are, such as Jeff Bezos. But for us, it took a lot of touch points, right? And so there's a bunch of key stakeholders sort of in the entrepreneurial circle at Princeton that, it came, attending events. A lot of these events were sort of happy hours and so forth, and basically, telling your story and saying, hey, here's who I am, here's my backstory, here's what we're about, here's what we're doing, and here's where we think it can go. Do you think there's any way that, you guys would be able to help us with your resources at Princeton? And over time, people get to know you and go, look, I really like these people, I like their mission and vision, and I want to try to support them, in any way I can. And as long as they're objectively a good fit for the program, a better fit than sort of any other company or whatnot, I'm going to give these kids a chance. And so, we got to the point where people trusted in us enough to not embarrass them and give us a chance. And, we're really grateful for that.
So talk about sales, you talk about selling direct to consumer. What is your strategy there for direct to consumer and your digital marketing approach?
Yeah, I think for us is that the problem with our product, the blessing and the curse of our product is that it sounds too good to be true, right? Like, oh, you're gonna give me this pill or these 3 pills that I'm gonna pay $3 for, and you're saying it's gonna make me feel 50% better, right? Like that sounds like a promise that's too good to be true, right? So all of our marketing kind of goes around this idea of how do we make sure that people actually believe that value prop, right? Believe that this product actually exists for them, right? So a lot of people say, oh, I don't get hangovers, so I don't need your product. But, you went to a happy hour with them the night before and they had like 4 drinks, and you're like, yeah, that guy's probably not waking up for his 5:30 a.m. workout, right?
Sure.
He's not going to hurt the next day, but he's, even 1% or 99% fine is still 1% hungover, right? Therefore, you need to convince people, hey, you actually have a need for this product, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? So you have to convince people this product's for them, and you got to get them to believe it. And what we've had the most success with is basically like, look, if you don't feel at least 50% better the next day following taking our product, we'll give you your money back, no questions asked. And less than 2% of people ever take us up on that offer. And so, that's an offering that we stand by, and it's easy for us to do it because it works mathematically, and it builds a lot of trust with the consumer. So.
Absolutely. And so you talk about sales, not just from a revenue perspective, but from an investor and an employee perspective. Talk more about that, and how do you sell to partners and to your employees?
Right. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, right, you would say that all that matters really is revenue, right? Is that when a company gets judged, people are looking at its revenue, its growth rate, its profit, right? All these sort of numbers. But what you don't see is that there's an entire support system that exists to create these numbers, right? Therefore, the numbers of the dependent variable, right, and the independent variable in this equation is basically the team that you assemble, right? Your vendors, your employees, your investors, anyone that supports your company, right, is sort of the thing that you can change, and then making those changes then affects the dependent variable, which is revenue, right? So, as my job, right, a lot of my job is basically making sure that the revenue keeps growing, that the profits are there, et cetera. But functionally, what that looks like is focusing on these independent variables. So what I'm always doing is selling these independent variables. So for us, the main thing that we're sort of focused on right now is growing our team, right? Which means that I have to go out and meet with really, really impressive people, because we don't want not impressive people on our team. Meet with really impressive people, hear what they're doing in life, and if I think that it's a good fit for their company and that, we could benefit their life by being a part of our company, it becomes my main mission to, give all of the reasons and explain why that, them taking their story and fusing it with our story ends up making both of our stories better, right? So every single day, I wouldn't call it selling employees, right? Because selling feels very transactional.
Yes.
So I know that the whole show, right, is about selling, but I think if you define selling correctly, right, which is always finding a good fit between a person and a product or service, right, then you shouldn't feel guilty about selling. If you think of selling as just like, oh, we should try to get this sale no matter what, even if it's not a good fit, there's something scummy about that.
Definitely.
Right? But if you see it as like, if you realize, no, I actually think our product or service is the best fit for this person, then you would be wrong not to try your heart out to sell this person because you actually believe that you could benefit their life, right? So I'll give you a quick story on this. We had one guy that we loved. He was amazing. And, we were selling him on joining the company, and we kind of came in and he interviewed a few times, and we realized the direction his life was going in was different than sort of the direction that the company needed, right? And so we basically had to come back to him and say, look, we love you, but, we just don't think we can make it work at this moment. But he sort of liked that interview process so much that we had a new job opening that came up 12 months later. And I thought, this guy would actually be a good fit for it. So I called him up, and sure enough, 2 weeks later, he accepts the job offer, right? And so that's what I think it means to sell well, right? Is you're not forcing people into it, right? You're trying to benefit their life and at the same time benefit your company. So whether that's employees, investors, vendors, such as your manufacturers or shipping partners, et cetera, you're always trying to say, hey, look, we think that you helping our company can also help your company, right? And so you're trying to fuse these sort of mutually beneficial bonds that end up being more than just about the product or the service, but you actually become friends with the people that you work with. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Absolutely. I think it really hurts when you have to fire a vendor or something, right? But usually the vendor actually understands because they ultimately know that their job is to make you successful, and if they're no longer the best fit for you, it's probably time to move on. And so most of my career has sort of been finding the right fits between different people, investors, supply chain vendors, et cetera.
That's awesome. And so my next question I'm excited to ask you is, you were a participant on Shark Tank, and you had a really interesting episode and experience. And so talk to us about your experience on Shark Tank and what was that overall experience like?
Yeah, I mean, that was a blast, and that's one of those like bucket list type of things, right? That in human history, there will only be a few thousand people that participate, right? In the Shark Tank, Dragon's Den, I think it's called like Lion's Den in Africa, right? Each continent sort of has a different form of it, right?
Okay.
But we're only talking about a few thousand people that were ever sort of participate in it. So the first thing to point out it is very hard to get in. So I believe Princeton, Harvard, Yale, they have an acceptance rate of like 4-ish%.
Okay.
Right? So tens of thousands of people are applying, and each year only, for Princeton it's about 1,400 students are actually getting in each year. Shark Tank, the math is even crazier. They end up bringing about 160 people that they film, and then, 160 companies, and then of those 160 companies that they film, only between about 90, or call it 80 and 100 companies actually air in the season, right? And then ultimately the applicant pool ranges anywhere from about 30 to 60,000 people.
Wow.
Meaning that getting on Shark Tank is about 25 times harder than getting into a Harvard, Princeton, or Yale.
Which you've accomplished both.
That's correct, yeah.
Wow. Wow.
I'm very proud of it, and I think, one of the things is that it wasn't sort of a free magic carpet ride to get on. We applied. We were initially sort of denied. Finally, they kind of, through a bunch of prodding via emails, they sort of decided, we'll let you kind of back in the process. We sent in audition tapes and worked with the producers a lot. And ultimately, Shark Tank is on ABC, and ABC is owned by Disney, right? And Disney has certain Christian values that would make it weird for them to have a subsidiary company showcase something that could be described as a hangover cure.
Okay.
Right? And so they actually, wanted us to come on the show and then actually kicked us out of the process. So I basically pulled an all-nighter. I was at this Princeton summer accelerator at the time. I pulled an all-nighter from, I worked all day and then pulled an all-nighter where I basically wrote this 15-page script. It's like, if Mark said this, I would say this. If Bethany Frankel, she was a guest shark that was in our episode, said this, I would say this. If this person said this, I would say this. If Damon John said this, I would say this. And basically ran through, here's what an entire episode would look like if you brought Thrive Plus, now known as Cheers, onto the show. And so basically, they got that email, and they never sort of told me that email was the reason that they let us back onto the show until we'd actually got to LA. We were about to go out and film the next day, and I was sitting in front of the whole production team, and the head honcho basically was like, Brooks, we've been doing Shark Tank now for about 10 seasons, or actually at our time it was 9 seasons, and we were on the last episode, so it was a full 9 seasons. So we've been doing this for 9 years, and not once has anyone ever sent to us a document with all the information that you sent. They said, look, we think you have the fight to do it. We want you to get out there tomorrow, and Mark Cuban doesn't like dietary supplements, so be prepared for a fight. Put the boxing gloves on. And so I went to bed that night thinking, tomorrow's about to be a lot of fun.
Wow. And so all this excitement and hype building up towards it, obviously you face some challenges and adversity kind of getting into the door.
Yep.
Knowing that Mark does not like dietary supplements, what was your thoughts walking in, and how did you prepare?
Yeah, I mean, my sort of opinion, right, is that if there's an elephant in the room, a conversation can never go forward, right? It takes a lot of sort of diligence dedication on the investor's part to put a pin in a subject, right, and save that subject for another time. So I knew that if Mark doesn't like dietary supplements, because most of them are snake oil, and we're in the industry and we see what other people are doing, and we're like thinking, why are you making consumers waste their money like that, right? It makes the rest of us that are actually doing it legit look bad, right? And so basically, my thought is we'd come onto the show and basically immediately try to address the issue. So I basically give my pitch, of which you can see Mark Cuban's basically in the episode visibly displeased on it. And then as I go to hand out the samples, right, as I'm handing Mark Cuban the samples, I say, Mark, I know historically that you dislike dietary supplements. I'd love to talk about that, and hopefully we'll be able to see eye to eye on the product. And so basically, we went right into it, right? So a lot of people wanted to hear more of the story, and Mark kept going, shh, shh, shushing the other sharks. And basically, we went back and forth on the science until finally Mark Cuban goes, okay, dihydromyrecetin, your main ingredient, sounds legit, and I applaud you for bringing that to market. However, you're talking about these drug delivery systems that, you're developing as a co-inventor with Princeton University. I don't think you'll be able to defend the intellectual property, and I'm out. And so, I thought we did a pretty good job, right? Because ultimately we ended up convincing Mark Cuban that dihydromyrecetin is a legit thing, is going to be a legit category of dietary supplements in the future. And the only thing we didn't convince him of was that we'd be able to get the intellectual property on it, which we have, and he can sort of eat the salt on that one.
Sure.
But I consider it a win. why we ended up not looking good on Shark. So I think we looked really good on Shark Tank from the viewer's perspective. I think the reason that we didn't get a deal is because in that process of working with Mark Cuban through these discussions, a lot of the other investors didn't even get to ask their business-related questions.
So Brooks, you know what just happened here today? You had a Cuban heist. You did an awful job today because you let Mark take over your presentation, and I never had a chance to learn anything. I'm out.
Right, so if you watch the end of the episode, you'll get these other sharks going like, I didn't even get to hear about the business. Like, what are their sales? What are their margins? Like, how do they produce it, right?
Yep.
And so they, I think it's bad that that didn't sort of get to occur, but I think we were sort of put into a box pretty early in the episode where you either look like scientists but a bad business team, or you look like a good business team but look like you're charlatans. And I would much rather consumers have faith in the product than in our ability to make money. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, consumers, all they care about is a good product at a reasonable price. Absolutely.
And so just one last note on the Shark Tank episode. I noticed that Bethany and Mark were kind of going at each other. What were your thoughts during that? Because it seemed pretty intense, and maybe that was editing, maybe it wasn't, but...
Every time I said, how much, like, no, homie, don't play that.
Don't interrupt me, and it's not an issue.
Mark, you can't not interrupt you because you haven't stopped talking.
Well, because I tried to ask the right questions.
But I want to ask a question
It's the
too.
right question
Instead of talking to me, ask.
I'm
Then
not supposed to ask
Bethany,
you.
let's
Hold
hear
on,
it.
I'd like to ask the Don and kiss the ring. May
Feel
I
free.
now speak?
Feel free.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
No, I mean that, so when you film a Shark Tank episode, right, you actually film for anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour and 15 minutes, and then they cut that episode down to about 8 minutes to 12 minutes. And still change some things, right? Like one shark will go out before another shark or whatever. But if you look at our episode, what you see is what you get, right? Like they were very, very true to what actually occurred in that hour. So that 10 minutes, I think, was a great cut of what actually occurred in the hour that I was out there. But on the other hand, I had a friend that was on Shark Tank as well, and he put it in terms of this. He said, look, a shark has to come up with a reasonable reason that they don't want to invest in your company 160 times a year, right? So when a guest shark like Bethany Frankel comes on, she has to figure out a reasonable reason that she doesn't want to invest in the company that doesn't make her look like an idiot for every single company that she looks at, except for the one or two that she does want to invest in.
Gotcha.
So they don't really like hold it personally or anything, right? You sort of look at it and go, that's a pretty hard job in and of itself. But I think what we're sort of very proud about coming out of the episode is that, we told America our story. We didn't really get to tell them sort of about the business fundamentals, right? But we told them about our product story, what the product does and how it can help them. And then sort of it became this sort of the Mark and Bethany sort of fight type of show. But I think what ended up happening is, they ended up looking really bad. And we ended up looking really good. And anytime that you're on the same stage as a billionaire and you come away looking like the reasonable person that America ends up liking, you can't argue with that. That's a good thing.
Absolutely. And you also, in that episode, you presented the scientific value behind your company. You've proven Mark wrong. You've gotten and secured the intellectual property, correct?
That's correct. We actually just made that breakthrough this year.
Congratulations.
We flipped over a lot of stones and we spent a lot of money, and it wasn't until the last thing that we tested, that we were even going to test, that we finally got it to work and were able to get intellectual property on it. But you kind of have to think back to Christopher Columbus. I forget how long it took him to sail across the Atlantic. But on the 29th day, they all wanted him to turn around. On the 30th day, everyone hated him. The 31st day, everyone hated him. 32nd day, there's land. Everyone's like, he was right. He was right. And so entrepreneurship's a lot like that, right? It's a little bit like, charging into the dark with the best data that you have and hoping that you're going to see land before you run out of food and die.
Awesome. Well, Brooks, really appreciate all your time today, sharing this awesome journey that you've gone through, Really excited to see what's next for Cheers and hearing more about your success. For those out there, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.